Becoming Us is a tender and inspiring romantic retelling of Barack and Michelle Obama's real-life love story, set against the backdrop of 1980 seconds and 90s Chicago. It begins when two brilliant minds meet at a law firm: Michelle Robinson, a driven and practical lawyer, and Barack Obama, an idealistic law student with dreams of changing the world. What starts as a mentorship slowly blossoms into a profound love that's tested by ambition, grief, sacrifice, and the weight of public life. Through heartbreak, distance, and personal loss, their bond deepens, ultimately transforming them into partners not just in romance, but in purpose. It's a love built on mutual respect, shared values, and the courage to grow together. This is a story you will want to sit back and enjoy. Before we start, I would like you to subscribe, like, and comment on this video from where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. Let us begin. The summer heat pressed against the windows of the Chicago law firm Sidley and Austin. But inside the office, it was something else entirely that made the air feel electric. Michelle Robinson was already making waves. A 25-year-old Princeton and Harvard law graduate, she was sharp, confident, and deeply committed to making a difference. Though used to being one of the few black women in elite spaces, Michelle carried herself with quiet authority and fierce integrity. She was not the kind of woman to be easily impressed. So, when she was asked to mentor a promising summer associate, a man named Barack Obama, she nearly rolled her eyes. A Harvard law student, they said. Smart, driven, but Michelle had seen many promising young men who fizzled under pressure or floated through on charm. The elevator chimed. The doors opened, and there he was. Barack Obama walked in with the calm grace that didn't match the anxious, overeager vibe of most interns. Tall, lean, with that slow, thoughtful smile that made people feel like they were the only ones in the room. He extended his hand, his deep voice smooth but humble. "Hi, I'm Barack." Michelle took his hand, feeling an unexpected flutter. "Michelle Robinson. Welcome to Sidley and Austin." She would later admit grudgingly that there was something about him. Their early days were filled with crisp legal documents and high-level meetings, but their casual chats during lunch breaks began weaving a different story. Michelle noticed how Barack listened not just to the words, but to what was behind them, how he seemed to see the world not as it was, but as it could be. Still, Michelle was hesitant. She had a strict rule: no dating at work, and besides, she had plans, clear, ambitious ones. Romance, especially with someone still in school, wasn't part of the equation. But Barack, he was patient, persistent in a quiet, respectful way. One evening, he finally asked her out, not with flashy lines or rehearsed charm, just, I think we'd have a lot of fun together, and you might even enjoy it." Michelle laughed. "You're assuming a lot," he grinned. "Only because I'm right." It wasn't a candlelit dinner or a fancy rooftop. Their first date was simple: a trip to the Art Institute of Chicago, followed by a walk and a shared scoop of chocolate ice cream. But it was unforgettable. They talked for hours about life, race, dreams, the pressure of being black in white spaces, and the weight of expectations. It wasn't long before Michelle realized this man wasn't just smart, he was soulful. He was different. He made her feel seen. Still, there was one thing that made her pause, one thing she couldn't quite shake. Barack had dreams, big dreams, and Michelle, she wasn't sure if she was ready to follow someone else's vision when she was still building her own. One night, under a canopy of city lights, Barack confessed, "I want to run for office someday, make real change, but I can't do it alone." Michelle's breath caught, because even then, before the world knew his name, she could see it, the spark of something historic, something dangerous, something that could consume them both. As Barack's ambitions begin to stretch beyond Chicago, Michelle is forced to ask herself, is the summer haze faded into the rich hues of autumn? But Michelle's feelings for Barack only deepened. There was something undeniably magnetic about him: his unshakable calm, his sense of purpose, the way he made her laugh even on the hardest days. Still, as their relationship bloomed, The quiet questions began to hum beneath the surface. Michelle was rooted, practical, grounded, and focused on building a stable life in Chicago. She dreamed of a home, a family, and maybe one day, a way to give back to the South Side community that raised her. Barack, he was already half in the clouds. Late into the night, while Michelle lay beside him, Barack would sit hunched over his desk, scribbling notes and underlining passages in dog-eared books. Du Bois, Mandela, King. He spoke often about community organizing, about the cracks in the justice system, about lifting people up instead of merely defending corporations in court. One night, after a long day at the firm, Michelle asked, "Do you really think you're going to change the world?" Barack didn't miss a beat. "I don't think I can do it alone. But yes, I believe I can make a difference." She admired that about him. She feared it too, because falling in love with a man like Barack Obama meant falling in love with possibility, not predictability. And Michelle had grown up in a world where stability was survival. Their worlds began to tug in different directions. While Michelle earned partner track recognition and considered long-term plans, Barack took a bold step. He left the firm to work as a community organizer in a part of the city many people avoided: Roseland, Altgeld Gardens. The pay was minimal. The hours were exhausting. Michelle was stunned. "You left a six-figure future to knock on doors and host town halls?" He gave her that signature smile, the one that always made her heart flutter and ache at the same time. "You once told me you wanted to help people. So do I. I just think my path might be a little messier." They still met for deep dish pizza on weekends, still curled up on the couch with Nina Simone playing in the background. But tension began to coil between them. There was love, no doubt about that. But love doesn't always silence the ticking clock of two lives growing in different directions. Michelle's parents noticed it too. Her brother, Craig, pulled her aside during Thanksgiving and said gently, "He's a good man, Mitch. But are you sure he's your kind of future?" Michelle didn't have an answer. Then came the night that changed everything. Barack had been invited to speak at a local community forum. He asked Michelle to come. She sat quietly in the back, arms crossed, skeptical. But when he stood up to speak, something in her cracked open. He didn't use big words or fiery speeches. He spoke from the heart about hope, justice, dignity. He made every person in the room feel like they mattered. And for the first time, Michelle saw what the world would one day see. He wasn't just brilliant, he was meant for something bigger. And suddenly, the fear she'd kept hidden rose in her throat. If she stayed by his side, would there be room for her dreams? And if she walked away, would she ever love like this again? The day Barack left for his final year at Harvard Law, the silence in Michelle's apartment was deafening. She had kissed him goodbye that morning at Union Station, smiling, joking, pretending the distance wouldn't change a thing. But as his train pulled away, something inside her ached with a strange mix of pride and panic. The man she loved was chasing greatness, and she was left standing still. Their phone call started strong, long, winding conversations about law, race, community, and each other. Michelle would wait for his voice like a favorite song at the end of a hard day. His laughter still lit up the line, still made her feel like she was home, even if he was miles away. But life didn't slow down for love. Michelle's days at the firm were a blur of depositions and deadlines. Her nights were lonelier than she admitted. Sometimes, she would walk by couples in the park or hear the soft murmur of laughter through apartment windows and wonder, is this what it means to love a man destined for more? To constantly miss him, even when he's yours. Barack, too, was buried in books and policy debates. He wrote her letters, beautiful, vulnerable letters that made her cry. He told her about the professors who challenged him, about classmates who didn't understand the neighborhoods he cared about. He told her he missed her smile, her grounding presence, her laugh. And then came the letter that shook her. "Michelle, I've been thinking a lot lately about the future, not just mine but ours. I know we're different in many ways. I know I ask more of this world than it sometimes wants to give. But every time I picture the life I'm building, you're there, you always are. When I come back to Chicago, I want us to talk, really talk, about what's next." All my love, Barack. Michelle stared at those words for hours. She wasn't the kind of woman who got swept up in fantasies. But suddenly, the idea of forever with Barack didn't feel like a risk. It felt inevitable. Still, a question gnawed at her. Could they build a life where both their dreams could live? Or would one always have to bend for the other? The night Barack returned to Chicago, Michelle dressed simply but beautifully, a soft white blouse and a navy skirt, her heart pounding in rhythm with every step toward the restaurant where they agreed to meet. He was already there. When he stood to greet her, time seemed to pause. The candlelight flickered in his eyes, and for a moment, nothing else existed. They talked for hours about love, about their careers, about the pressure of becoming something bigger than they'd imagined. Barack reached across the table, took her hand, and said softly, "Michelle, I want to build a life with you. But not just beside you, I want to build with you." And that was when she knew he didn't want her to follow him. He wanted them to lead together. The night ended with a kiss that felt like a promise. But before they could take the next step, life threw them a curve neither had expected. The months following Barack's return were filled with joy and tension. Michelle had never felt so certain, and yet so shaken. On paper, they were perfect. They loved deeply, challenged each other, and shared a vision rooted in justice. But underneath it all, the quiet weight of sacrifice began to settle like dust between them. Barack was preparing for his first real foray into politics, a run for the Illinois State Senate. Michelle supported him. Of course, she did. But as she stood beside him at community rallies, smiling through speeches and shaking hands with strangers, a small voice in her chest whispered, "Is this the beginning of his life, or the end of mine as I know it?" And then, the call came. Michelle's father, Fraser Robinson, the man who had been her moral compass, her quiet protector, her biggest cheerleader, had taken a sudden turn. His multiple sclerosis had worsened fast. In just weeks, his health deteriorated to the point where Michelle found herself spending nights at her childhood home, helping her mother, feeding him soup, holding his trembling hand through the pain. Barack was there. He was present, but he was also preparing for campaign launches, fundraising meetings, and policy forums. His world was expanding, while Michelle's felt like it was shrinking around a hospital bed. One night, as Michelle sat beside her father, watching his chest rise and fall in fragile rhythm, she whispered, "Daddy, what do I do? I love him, but I feel like I'm losing myself." Her father turned his head slowly, his voice gravelly but firm. "You don't lose yourself loving the right man. The right man helps you find more of yourself." He passed away 3 days later. The grief hit Michelle like a freight train, and in the days that followed, she began to retreat emotionally, spiritually from everything, including Barack. He tried. God, he tried. He held her when she cried. He told her they could pause the campaign, slow things down. But Michelle shook her head. "This is your dream, Barack. You have to run. You have to lead." But even as the words left her mouth, her heart ached with loneliness. One night, weeks before the election, Barack came home late from a strategy meeting. Michelle was on the couch, still in her work clothes, eyes red from tears. He sat beside her, taking her hand. "I miss us, Michelle." She looked at him. "So do I, but I need to know," he continued, his voice raw. "Can you still see a future with me in it, even if that future gets bigger, louder, harder?" Michelle swallowed the knot in her throat. "I don't know," she whispered. The silence that followed was louder than any argument they'd ever had. The weeks passed. In quiet uncertainty, Michelle threw herself into work at the hospital, taking on initiatives focused on underserved communities. She was rebuilding herself not just as Barack's partner, but as her own woman again. Barack poured himself into the campaign, often looking out at crowds, wondering if Michelle would be in the back, her eyes locked with his the way they used to be. Then came election night. He won. The applause thundered around him. Reporters, volunteers, and family celebrated. But Barack's eyes searched for one person, and then there she was. Michelle stood at the back of the room in a simple navy dress, her eyes shimmering, not with tears, but with clarity. As the room cheered, Barack stepped off the stage and walked straight to her. The crowd seemed to vanish. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said softly. She smiled faintly. I wasn't sure either. And then, quietly, she said the words that changed everything. But I realized, your dream doesn't have to eclipse mine. Maybe they were always meant to walk side by side. He took her hand. They didn't speak for a moment. They didn't need to. From that night forward, they weren't just in love, they were partners in becoming. The road ahead would be long and relentless. Campaigns, criticism, sacrifices, children, the White House, the world. But in that moment, they chose each other not because it was easy, but because it was real. Because it was worth it. Because together, they were stronger than the sum of their dreams. Years later, the world knew their names: President Barack Obama, First Lady Michelle Obama. But behind the historic titles, behind the flashing cameras and state dinners, was the same quiet love that began on a warm Chicago summer afternoon. They still made time for evening walks, for kitchen dancing with their daughters, for long talks about the world they wanted to leave behind. Michelle would often glance at Barack across the room, still reading, still dreaming, and smile to herself. Because in a world where fame can often fracture intimacy, their love remained rooted in what truly mattered: trust, laughter, friendship, and the deep, steady beat of two hearts still becoming. Us.